Emily Miller was the kind of daughter every parent dreamed of, brilliant, charming, and adored by everyone in Hawthorne Hills. But when a trail of brutal murders led straight to her, David and Margaret Miller were forced to face the unthinkable truth. Their perfect child was a cold-blooded killer. The Miller family had always been admired in Hawthorne Hills, a small and quiet town where everyone knew each other's name. David Miller was a respected history teacher at the local high school, and his wife Margaret ran a small flower shop that filled the neighborhood with the scent of roses and lilies. Their daughter, Emily, was their pride and joy, the kind of child parents dreamed of having. With her neat brown hair, bright hazel eyes, and warm, confident smile, she seemed to draw people in effortlessly. From the outside, her life was a shining example of perfection. She excelled academically, consistently placing at the top of her class. Her teachers described her as mature beyond her years, someone who didn't just complete assignments, but went above and beyond. She played the piano gracefully at school recitals, volunteered at the community library, and was known for baking cookies for neighbors during the holidays. Her friends admired her not only for her intelligence, but for her kindness, always ready with a listening ear or a gentle word when someone needed comfort. To her parents, Emily was more than a daughter. She was their legacy, a reflection of their love and dedication. They had worked hard to give her the best opportunities, and in return, Emily seemed determined to make them proud in every possible way. There was a calm confidence about her, a way she carried herself that made even adults respect her. She was the type of person who could walk into a room and instantly command attention without saying a word. People in town often spoke about her bright future, certain she would leave Hawthorne Hills one day to make her mark on the world. David and Margaret never doubted it for a second. But even in the glow of her achievements, there were moments that felt out of place, small, fleeting glimpses of something colder beneath her polished exterior. Sometimes she stayed out later than she claimed, arriving home with no real explanation for where she'd been. There were phone calls she would take in hushed tones, stepping into another room and locking the door. On one occasion, a neighbor's pet went missing, and though no one suspected her, David remembered the way Emily had watched the search with an unreadable expression, almost as if she were studying the scene rather than feeling any concern. These moments were rare and easily dismissed, lost in the overwhelming tide of her apparent goodness. Her parents chalked them up to normal teenage privacy, moments of independence, nothing unusual. The truth was, no one wanted to question perfection. The image of Emily as the perfect daughter was too comforting, too easy to believe. She had a way of disarming suspicion with a smile, of turning attention away from herself with charm and grace. And so, the Millers never looked deeper, never asked the hard questions, never considered that the small cracks they occasionally saw could be warning signs. It was easier to believe their daughter was exactly what she seemed to be, a brilliant young woman with a heart of gold. They had no way of knowing that beneath that carefully crafted mask, something far more dangerous was taking shape, something that would one day shatter their world beyond repair. It began quietly, almost unnoticed, like a shadow creeping into the edges of Hawthorne Hills. At first, there was just one incident, a body found in the wooded area on the outskirts of town. The victim was a man in his 30s, a stranger to the community, with no known connections to anyone local. His death was brutal, the kind that left investigators shaken, but because there were no witnesses and no apparent motive, the case stalled quickly. People whispered about it for a week or two, then life moved on. Hawthorne Hills was a safe place after all. Violence didn't happen here, or so they thought. Months later, another body turned up, this time in a park not far from the elementary school. The victim was a woman in her 20s, also unknown to anyone in town. The scene was eerily similar to the first, the same precision in the injuries, the same strange black ribbon tied tightly around the victim's wrist. Detectives began to realize they were dealing with something far more serious than an isolated crime. Word spread quickly, and for the first time in years, residents started locking their doors at night and looking over their shoulders when walking alone. The murders didn't follow a predictable pattern. Victims varied in age, gender, and background. None were connected to each other, at least on the surface. but each was found within a short drive of Hawthorne Hills, each marked by that same black ribbon. Some were discovered deep in wooded trails, others in quiet alleyways, and a few in places so public it was chilling to think the killer might have walked among townspeople unnoticed. The randomness of it all only deepened the fear, because no one could tell who might be next. Emily, however, seemed untouched by the tension that gripped the community. While neighbors canceled evening plans and parents kept their children indoors, she went about her life as though nothing had changed. She still attended school functions, smiled for yearbook photos, and helped her mother at the flower shop on weekends. If anything, she appeared even more focused and composed, almost as if the fear around her didn't exist. Her parents took pride in her resilience, thinking it was a sign of strength. Still, there were moments that stood out, small but unsettling. Emily sometimes asked odd questions about the murders, wanting to know details that hadn't been shared publicly. She seemed fascinated by news coverage, following updates closely, but never expressing fear or sympathy. Her friends noticed she could recall crime scene specifics with uncanny accuracy, though they assumed she was simply repeating what she'd heard on the news. In reality, no one could explain how she knew so much. As the body count rose, the black ribbons became a grim signature that haunted the town. For police, it was the only consistent clue in a case with no clear suspect. For residents, it became a symbol of the unknown, a warning that someone out there was watching, planning, and striking without mercy. The town's once peaceful nights were now filled with unease, yet no one realized the person they feared most might be smiling at them in the grocery store, or sitting quietly in a classroom, hiding in plain sight. The knock at the door came just after sunset, when the Millers were finishing dinner. David answered, expecting a neighbor or a delivery, but instead found two uniformed officers and a plainclothes detective standing on the porch. Their expressions were grave, the kind that made the air feel heavier. Margaret joined him at the door, confusion etched on her face. The officers explained they were following up on new information in the ongoing murder investigation. A witness from the most recent crime scene claimed to have seen a young woman fleeing into the woods, someone with Emily's height, build, and distinct brown hair. They weren't accusing her outright, they said, but needed to speak with her. The Millers reacted instantly, their voices sharp with disbelief. Emily, their Emily, it was unthinkable. They insisted she had been at home that night, working on a school project, but the detective's eyes lingered, as if he could see through their certainty. When Emily entered the room, she appeared calm, even curious. She agreed to answer a few questions, her tone polite, her posture perfect. She explained she had been in her room all evening, studying. There was nothing more to say. The officers left without pressing further, but the encounter left a heavy silence in the Miller household. After she went upstairs, David and Margaret exchanged uneasy glances. The thought was absurd, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, while tidying Emily's room, Margaret noticed something strange. A desk drawer was stuck, as if something inside was caught. When she finally pried it open, she found a small length of black ribbon curled up in the corner. At first, she didn't think much of it, perhaps from a gift or a craft project. But the murders had been in the news for months, and that black ribbon had become a haunting image burned into every resident's mind. Margaret felt a cold unease creep over her. She told herself she was being ridiculous, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, David and Margaret decided to search her room more thoroughly. They moved slowly, almost guiltily, as if they were intruding on sacred space. In the far back corner under the bed, David's hand brushed against something hard. Pulling it out, they found a small wooden box, its lid secured with a metal clasp. Inside were photographs, each one showing a victim from the news, taken while they were still alive. Dates were scribbled in the corners, matching the days the murders had occurred. Some of the photos looked as though they had been taken without the subject's knowledge, as if someone had been watching them from a distance. The Millers stared at the contents in stunned silence, their minds racing. There was no plausible explanation for why their daughter would have these photos, no reason that made sense. The girl they thought they knew, The girl they believed incapable of harm suddenly felt like a stranger. Somewhere in the shadows of their perfect home, a terrible truth was beginning to take shape, one they were still too terrified to speak aloud. The interrogation room was cold and plain, a stark contrast to the warm, safe world Emily had always seemed to inhabit. She sat at the table with her hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. The detectives had arrived at the Miller home early that morning with a search warrant, seizing her phone, laptop, and the wooden box of photographs. Her parents watched in shock as she was led away in handcuffs, her calm gaze meeting theirs without a hint of fear or shame. It was as if she had been expecting this moment, as though it were part of a plan only she understood. In the days that followed, investigators unraveled a side of Emily no one could have imagined. Her phone was a gateway into a hidden life, encrypted chat rooms where she interacted with strangers using false names, detailed notes about her victims' routines, and GPS records tracing her movements to each crime scene. She had meticulously studied her targets, learning their habits, weaknesses, and schedules. Many of them had been lured through online forums disguised as harmless spaces, where Emily's charm and intelligence made her seem trustworthy. The black ribbon, which had baffled police for months, turned out to be her personal signature, a mark she used to claim her victims. In one chilling set of notes, she described it as a way of taking ownership over the moment of death, a way to make the killings feel complete. She didn't choose her victims randomly. Each was selected for a reason that only she understood, reasons rooted in a complex web of power and control. Some were people who reminded her of past grievances. Others were chosen simply because she could. Detectives discovered she had been keeping trophies, each connected to a different victim. A wristwatch, a set of keys, a silver locket, a frayed scarf, small, seemingly ordinary objects, but each one belonged to someone whose life she had ended. These items were hidden in various places, taped under drawers, buried in the lining of a suitcase, and even sewn into the hem of an old coat hanging in her closet. Her parents sat in disbelief during the first court hearing, unable to reconcile the smiling girl in family photos with the calculated predator the prosecution described. They learned that Emily had been out on nights they thought she was home, slipping away after they'd gone to bed, returning hours later with an alibi ready in case anyone asked. The charm that had made her so beloved in the community had been her most dangerous weapon, allowing her to move through life without raising suspicion. What unsettled everyone most was her demeanor. Emily never broke down, never expressed fear or regret. In interviews, she spoke about the murders in the same tone she might use to describe a school assignment. Her voice was steady, her eyes clear. The person sitting before the detectives was not the perfect daughter of Hawthorne Hills. She was something else entirely, deliberate, calculating, and without remorse. The trial of Emily Miller became the most sensational case the state had seen in decades. Reporters from across the country filled the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing every time she was escorted inside. The gallery was packed with townspeople, some driven by morbid curiosity, others by the desperate need to understand how the bright, promising girl they'd known had turned into a cold-blooded killer. Her parents attended every day, sitting stiffly in the front row, their faces pale and drawn. They could barely look at their daughter, yet they couldn't stay away. The prosecution presented their evidence with methodical precision. They showed the photographs found in Emily's possession, each one matched to a victim. They detailed the timeline of her movements, supported by GPS data and witness accounts. They revealed her online communications, where she used false identities to gain trust and lure victims. Each revelation was like a fresh wound for David and Margaret, tearing away the last remnants of denial. The black ribbons were displayed in court, each one sealed in its own evidence bag, silent and damning. Emily sat through it all with unnerving composure. She took notes, whispered occasionally to her attorney, and glanced at the jury with a calmness that made even seasoned court officials uneasy. Her lack of visible emotion became a point of public fascination. Psychologists debated whether she was incapable of empathy or simply refused to show it. To the people who had once praised her as the perfect daughter, this detached young woman was unrecognizable. On the final day of testimony, the defense attempted to humanize her, painting a picture of a misunderstood and pressured young woman. But the moment the judge asked Emily if she wished to speak, she delivered a blow no one expected. In a steady voice, she revealed that her very first victim had been someone her parents knew well, a family friend who had comforted them during a difficult time years earlier. She explained it without hesitation, even recounting how she had planned it months in advance. Her parents froze, the color draining from their faces. This was no random spree, it was personal. Each murder, she admitted, had been selected for a reason tied to them, whether through friendship, business, or fleeting connection. It was as though she had been sending a message all along, one that they had failed to understand. The courtroom fell silent. The jury's decision came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Emily was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She stood as the sentence was read, her expression unchanged, as if the outcome had been inevitable from the start. When she was led away, she didn't look back at her parents. David and Margaret were left staring at the empty space where she had sat, their lives hollowed out by the truth. They would return to their quiet house in Hawthorne Hills, surrounded by photographs of a smiling girl who never really existed. And for the rest of their lives, they would ask themselves the same question: how could they have lived with a monster and never seen the darkness waiting just beneath the surface?